This is the Powered Up Podcast, show number 6.
Talk to them about their lives. Smile, accept them where they're at. When they're late, don't yell at them that they're late. Just say, hey, glad you made it. Have a seat. This is what we're doing. Because life's too short to be mad at kids all the time. So just talk to them. The more they know that you care, the more they'll learn from you.
Welcome to a real-world education with insight and advice from teachers in the game, where current and former educators reveal what truly sets apart the great teachers and what it takes to make a positive impact on students. Whether you're in pre-service learning, new to the game, or a seasoned veteran, this is the show for you. You'll leave feeling inspired to take action because we are powering education by empowering you.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Ken Erman, host of the Powered Up Podcast, and I am here with my co-host, Mr. Matt Every Student Matters Rogers. Matt, how are we doing tonight?
You know what? We are doing great. We just got out of an awesome interview. It was an asynchronous school day with 12 to 14 inches of snow. Life is good as long as you're in the warmth and drinking some hot cocoa. How about you, buddy?
I agree with that. I was able to connect with some teachers today. We also were asynchronous due to snow, but I had some extra time with my kids, which I love, and my wife, which I love. And I am definitely feeling powered up after our interview that we just finished with Amy Rehberg, a phenomenal teacher out of Colorado. So, Matt, a question I want to throw your way. It's not really related to our interview tonight, but we are pretty much exactly halfway through the school year, even though this might come out a little bit later. What is a goal you have for the second half of the year to benefit your students?
Well, the obvious one would be stay healthy, especially in all years. My classroom has, knock on wood, not had any significant exposures. We haven't had to really do anything. Our school is just doing a phenomenal job to keep everyone as safe as possible. And with the exception of today, we've been in class most every day of the school year, which has been awesome. But academically, when looking at that, I think actually a quote that we had in our interview today of teaching kids, not subjects, being a primary focus, I think that's forefront of my mind right now. I was reading something and saying that that we're not trying to measure kids against a standard year. Why would we do that? We are teaching kids how to survive a pandemic first. And I think that being the forefront of our minds, that, yeah, it's difficult to look at data and it's still important to do, but more than anything, we are trying to model composure, emotional kind of vulnerability, and really the way to handle this time that we've never really processed ourselves, and being authentic in ourselves is the best thing we can do right now.
That's great. I completely agree with that. For me, this year, I was new in the instructional coach role. I was new to secondary. I'm in the same district I've always been in, but a lot of new faces, a lot of new teachers that I'm working with. And, because of the year it's been really nonstop for me in supporting teachers, whether it was very heavy in technology and running Zoom and understanding all the settings in the beginning of the year, to figuring out just everything that we're using right now. And things are slowing down a little bit for me. And it's given me time to reflect and realize that my goals going into the year, before I truly realized how crazy it was going to be, were to establish really positive relationships with the teachers that I was going to be meeting in the middle schools and the high school, and to really learn what does secondary instruction look like in my district. What are our teachers doing to best support students, to create great learning experiences, And frankly, I just haven't had the opportunity to do that. And so I'm trying to figure out what are my strategies going to be to start to build that into my schedule on a weekly basis. And I'm going to start reaching out to teachers that I've worked with the most to try to just get into their classroom, not for their sake, but more for my sake, and try to learn more. Because I know that will not only benefit me now, but it will benefit me later than year in the year, and even more so next year, to be able to better support our teachers and our administrators and students. So that's really what I'm looking forward to for the second half of the year.
And let's be honest, you're not going to have to worry about any tech integration after this year. They're going to be up to date with their LMSs and Zooms. It's going to shift in a lot of ways into a curricular position with an emphasis of technology, which is a little blessing in disguise, at least for your end and our end, of everyone, whether they wanted to or not, have scrambled and done an incredible job. We don't give enough credit, but an incredible job of getting up to speed to handle this brand new way of teaching. So
Absolutely. I always try to remind teachers anytime I'm working with them, no matter how busy it looks like an instructional coach is, being a teacher is the hardest job. Being in the classroom is the hardest job. And they are all, not just my district, everywhere, doing an incredible job with being flexible and adjusting to everything that this year is bringing. So before we jump into the interview with Amy Rehberg, do you have anything that you want to share, Matt, before we get in this interview? It really was one of our best by far.
yeah, and we've had some awesome interviews, but this one stands out as a domain that we don't have. I talk or ask a question about it being a can of worms grouping. Is this English language learner in the high school, and Amy ends up serving as the bridge between them coming to her and her doing everything in her power to make sure that when they leave high school, they are prepared to be as successful as possible. Just of all teachers' jobs in a grouping that traditionally has the most challenge in a lot of ways, she just does an incredible. Whether she believes it and will flaunt it, we know she won't do that. But she does an incredible job and just drops hint and tips after each other of priorities and colored markers and key vocabulary, something simple that I can do tomorrow, that I will be doing tomorrow to revisit objectives, revisit core ideas in your lesson to make sure everyone can play on that same playing field.
Absolutely. I would just add to that she embodies the reason that we started this podcast. She's just a great teacher doing great things. And she knows she's a good teacher, but I feel like she doesn't, like so many teachers, you just say, yeah, that's what I do, but we want to recognize that greatness, applaud her for it, and help other teachers realize, like, wow, it's a great idea. I'm going to start doing that. Or, hey, I do that too. Like, I guess what I'm doing, it is important. It does make a difference, because we don't hear that enough. Teachers do not hear that enough. And it really embodies that reason. So, without any further delay, let's get into the interview with Amy Rehberg. Amy, welcome to the podcast. We are super excited to have you here. How are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So why don't you just start off by introducing yourself to our audience, your name, what you teach, where you teach, and the state that you're from.
All right. Well, my name is Amy Rehberg. I am currently living in Colorado, in the suburbs of Denver. I teach at a high school called Horizon High School, which is in Thornton, which is north of Denver, actually. And I have been teaching there my entire career. I even student taught there. I started out as a language arts teacher, and then I kind of morphed into teacher of it was an alternative program called Action Learning Program for Students. It was for juniors and seniors who didn't have enough credit to graduate but wanted to graduate, based on a philosophy of hands-on things in terms of real-life application. We found ways for them to make up their credit and graduate on time. And then through that program, I started to notice that a lot more students who were language learners, English language learners, were joining our program because they were short on credit. And so back when they gave sabbaticals and paid 75% of your salary and gave you a year off to go back to school, I applied and was accepted and went and got my license to teach English as a second language. So that's what I've been doing now for the last 15 years. And this is my 28th year teaching. So yeah, that's my story.
That is I just gotta say, that's a really cool story. I've never heard of a teacher kind of going through that transformation. I love how you inserting yourself in a program that you saw to be valuable. You noticed that trend of students that were constantly enrolling in that, and that kind of inspired you and helped you embark on that journey of really changing your position. I don't know. I guess I know a few ELL teachers. We have one program in our district. It's in one of our elementary schools. But I guess I kind of always in the back of my mind, and maybe this is a little stereotypical, imagined teachers more passionate about language, or just who knew a second language themselves, whether through their collegiate study or their family upbringing, kind of leaning towards that ELL experience. So when you moved into that, did you have to study a specific language to become fluent in it? What does that program look like for you to be able to support those students that are struggling with English language?
Well, I think that's the biggest misconception about teaching ESL or ELD or whatever acronym we're using this week, is that you have to speak another language, because I don't speak another language. I know enough Spanish to travel through Central and South America. I know a little bit of French. I know a little bit of Chinese and Vietnamese from teaching ESL. But really what my job was to be fluent in English and to really be knowledgeable about how to break down the language and how to make language come alive for students and activate their background knowledge about topics and the cognates that connect their language to our language. Of course, that's easier when we share an alphabet. It gets a little more difficult with some of the Asian languages, but it's really just about engaging them through pantomime, through charades, through drawing, through images, through repetition, through singing. So, and it just depends on the student. It depends on their level of education prior to coming to the United States. Because lots of times the majority of the students in the class are not necessarily people who have moved here from another country. Many students that we have are children of Spanish speakers or Vietnamese speakers who were born in the United States, but they didn't learn English until they started kindergarten or first grade. And so by the time I get them in high school, there's always that crossover too between students who've been identified as special ed, even though they're language learners, and then true students with learning disabilities who are also language learners, and then they struggle to pass the gigantic standardized tests that allow them not to be labeled ESL anymore. So yeah, I don't know another language, and I think in some ways, and I don't mean to sound critical, but in some ways it's almost not as good for students to have a teacher who will immediately go into their language. I mean, we do a lot more learning and having aha moments when we're both struggling to understand each other than if I cheated and just translated.
That is an incredibly important point. And I think about like my world language experience, which is very minimal, very minimal. But it was all about immersive based experience and the idea of not giving shortcuts and just you're not expected to pick it all up in the moment. But like you said, even if it's just context clues of what's going on in that world and trying to piece that together and make those kind of neurons make connections and have those things start hopefully piecing themselves together. So kind of for your students and learners, and that they're
proficient enough in the language to be successful. I think one of the things that you pointed out, which I think at the elementary level is really tough, is the concept of differentiating between, is it a language-based issue or a learning-based issue? And I think I'd love to hear your perspective, because as you were mentioning, I know for a kid to be dismissed from, at least at our level in Pennsylvania, to be dismissed, they have to rank proficient on their standardized tests. So not only do they need to be good enough at the new language, but also up to grade level completely with no kind of excuses. Is that similar where you're at as well?
It is, absolutely. It's been a transformation, because when I first started with ESL at the high school level in our district, it was really bare bones, and it hadn't really fully developed, and we weren't really meeting the needs of all of the ELL kids that we had, because so many of them presented really beautifully with their social language, that we were like, oh, they're fluent, because we didn't have a standardized test. But then the standardized test allowed us to look at their academic language and see that there were some pretty big gaps between social language and academic language. And some kids really are able to, with some very guided practice about how the standardized test is set up, able to then demonstrate that they do have that academic control of their language. But then the kids who really do present with learning disabilities struggle with that whole test-taking environment as it is, and the complexities of the questions, and the fact that they aren't necessarily read to. We can't give them as many accommodations as they would, say, on the SAT or the PSAT or the MAPS tests and things like that. So it's interesting, because we have kids who might not be reading at a 9th or 10th grade level, yet that's the level that the test is at. So not only, do they have that deficit in terms of larger, more academic language or vocabulary, but then they have that comprehension stagnation a little bit also. So it's a drag. But I've been really successful. Our school is really successful. We have a great collaborative spirit in terms of what we do with our ELL kids. And I know that at my school, we're in our district is kind of cut in half, and one half of the district has a really large population, a larger population of ELL students, and then my school and a couple other schools in our side of the district, we'll say, have less. And so I've been the main and only ELD teacher all these years up until this year. We just got another teacher to come in and do some more stuff. So I've had a total child education experience. I mean, I look at their schedules. I work with their other teachers, the other teachers in my school. We have sheltered cores, and our cores are English and social studies classes integrated together, and those teachers are trained in PSYOP and other sheltering protocols. And then, I work really closely with math and science and to support those kids. And so they then bloom in their content classes, which ultimately helps them do better on the access test. We work with WIDA out of Wisconsin. I'm not sure, is that who you guys use too?
Yep. Yeah, we use WIDA as well. Can I just ask a follow-up question? So you're talking about the efforts, obviously directly with the kids and families, but I've got to imagine, I know, so what's unique is this year our district is seeing a rise in a need for ELD and ELL learning support. So we went from having one of our elementary schools had our EL learners, and now both elementary schools have it. And so with that has come a ton of training for the teachers and facilitators in our building. And I find that to be fascinating, and I'm super appreciative of all years to still have the time to support those learners. But I've got to imagine, as big as your role working with the kids is working with the staff, because I was a learning support teacher for 6 years, and it was one of those that you were the stopgap for everyone, right? At the end, you were essentially those kids' most important person in that building because you were the communication source. So what has your effort been to make that program successful? I've got to imagine is a huge legwork in opening other teachers' minds and making those learners have the potential to thrive in your classroom.
I don't know if I could well, that's not true. I feel like I could translate the skills that I use to make my program in our school successful to another school, but I think that I was really fortunate because I already had been at that school for 13 years. I had a reputation as a teacher. I was respected. My ideas were listened to, so that when I come in as this new role as the teacher and the coordinator of our ELL program, and I can go to a teacher and say, hey, this kid's totally struggling. Can I give you some tips? Do you need a thought partner? Can I help you scaffold the next test or whatever assignment you're working on? They were really receptive to that. So I think one of the most important things is not necessarily waiting around for someone to come and ask you for help, even though I'm stopped in the hall constantly. Our school is set up where teachers don't have their own rooms, so we travel to rooms just like the students do, and then teachers back in the olden times when we could actually be at school normal had these staff centers where we collaborated with each other. So I didn't just sit with language teachers. There was math and science and social studies and English teachers all around me all the time, and so that really provides a collaborative environment and ability to to joke and have fun, and then say, hey, what about Jojo? Why isn't he passing? Or I see he has 3 missing assignments. So just that collaboration, and then the idea that they trust that I'm not judging them. I really just want to support them, and so it works. It works for the kids.
As I alluded to earlier, in my school district, so we have 7 elementary schools, and we don't have a huge population of ELL learners. So it's comparatively to yours, Matt, it's one school that has all of these students. We have some different schools. One is for the autistic program. One is for a different level of that. One is ELL program. And so I didn't have a huge amount of experience in my classroom with students in this program. However, one of my later years in my career, I had a student that was no longer required to be at the school that had the ELL program. So he was moved to his home school, which was mine. And I had him in my class. And one of my biggest learning experiences was that background knowledge was so important for him. He read pretty well. I would say maybe one letter below on Faunus and Pinnell. That's the system that we used. Really, really smart kid. Like, he was quick to figure things out. He was a great student, hardworking. But I'll never forget one time we're reading a book, and he came up and he asked me, he said, hey, Mr. Ehrman, what is this? And it was like a sentence or a short phrase in the book we were reading. And it was, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was something incredibly obvious to a person who's grown up in America in an American culture home. And it just clicked with me like, oh, wow, like, you don't know this because of your background knowledge. And it made me really reflect on, I need to make sure that I'm really front loading my support with the student in terms of establishing background knowledge, especially when it was related to reading. The books we were reading, whether it was a short story or the novel. But what I also found was, as I started to do that, I realized I should just be doing it more in general with all of my students. And I've often found that when working with students, whether they have some sort of IEP, 504, whatever, they just need support, undocumented support, it's often a time to reflect and look back and say, you know what, I should probably just be doing this all the time with all my kids, or I should just be doing this more often. A lot of special education teachers sometimes joke like, SDIs are really things you should just be doing anyway, but we're just putting it on paper. So do you have any specific strategies that you implement with teachers, or that you recommend that they use, or that you model for them, that you think are incredibly effective for your students, but you find that are really just supportive for all students?
Well, at the high school level, it's a little different, I think, than at the elementary level. But one of the standard truth, you know, diehard activities or scaffolds that I like is just in terms of the color of the markers that you use on the board, so that things that are connected by the color. The idea too that you start every lesson with 3 or 4 words that you're going to say, these are the key vocabulary for today, and if you can master these 4 words, you can talk about our topic. So key vocabulary and color connections in terms of with objectives, with assignments, with homework, with just the thread of connection through something. And lots of times we forget that, even because we're up there talking, and our board behind us is white. And if we could just put a few words, key vocabulary, maybe a mind map, even with just a couple points to show how we're moving from what you already know into this new idea, and perhaps this is where we're going with that, or this is how you're going to use it. And if that can be really concrete, kids, ELL kids especially, will do a lot better. I think lots of times, sorry, I was just going to say, I think lots of times teachers are, I don't know if they're trying to impress other teachers with their large amount of language on an assignment, or as they present something, are they just trying to say everything they know, whereas you've lost the kid after like the first 3 sentences. And so you've really got to try to be concise, be repetitious, and then be really clear on the board too. They need to see it and they need to hear it.
Yeah, I think that goes to show the foundation of education. What we originally learned is really, it's the reason we hear it first. Learning focused schools, I don't know if you're familiar with that program, but it just talks about a lesson plan that just is pretty straightforward. What are your objectives? Kind of how are you activating the learning? What is the meat? And then what is that kind of review and proof of learning? And I remember having to write essential questions that I wrote to be fancy, kind of like what you're saying. When I started teaching, the whole goal was, let's write this up here to make it seem like we're going to answer the world's problems. In reality, we're just working on cause and effect today, right? That's all we're doing in this lesson, but I wanted to make it seem like we are legitimately curing this massive question. Realistically, find a cause and predict an effect from that. Like, that's really what it comes down to. And I think you talking about linking through colors or key vocabulary is really the essence and why we write objectives. And it's not so much we go into state standards to pull and show, hey, there's a reason I'm doing it. It's we're utilizing these baseline to make sure that we feel like the kids leave with that skill. And transitioning away from, I guess, standards-based to mastery learning is a huge thing, especially in your role, I would imagine.
Well, I think what you're both getting at too is that, thinking about those objectives, writing those words on the board. I really love that color idea. I never did that. I never thought about that. But having that there doesn't necessarily mean, and Amy, you kind of alluded to this, doesn't necessarily mean that you don't know the content or that you need something to support you. Sometimes it's good to have that to kind of turn around and look at the board and say, oh, right, I need to make sure I'm hitting these 4 words. Have I talked about these 4 words enough? When teachers are having students work in small groups, I always really encourage them to have some questions prepared. And it's not that you need those questions prepared because you don't know how to, in the moment, spark conversations with students. But by thinking about those questions ahead of time, you're thinking about, what do I want my students to think about? Because that's what a question prompts. So I just really like that. I thought that was a phenomenal tip, but you were going to jump in, so go ahead.
I don't remember now.
That's okay. So what I want to ask you too, and you've been in this role for a while now, so you would have seen this transformation, is how has technology, how has it transformed what you're able to do with your position and what you're able to accomplish with students?
That's so interesting because, I was in that conference a few weeks ago or at the turn of the semester, and the presenter was talking about how, we've been talking about since the millennium that we're preparing students for the 21st century, and we're doing all these things to get ready, and then all of a sudden, boom, now we're in the 21st century, and there was no more transition, and now our life is technology and all the tools and the apps and the learning models that we can use within the computer. So for me, I've really loved a lot of the interactive things that I've found with teaching this way, like Jamboard with Google and Pear Deck and Flipgrid for recording. That's something I would have used all these years for speaking practice when instead of pulling a kid in the hall and kind of egging them on or giving them clues with my facial expressions. This Flipgrid concept, are you guys familiar with it?
Yes. Huge
it's
fan.
Super cool, and they're forced to just talk to me, and they don't have me going, yeah, right, or do you mean this, or or going, no, that's not right. So that I think is monumental in terms of speaking practice. I told you guys a little bit about what I've been trying to do because I have found through all the way until this year using different online listening practice tools, websites, people have made things. It's really geared mostly towards international students learning on their own. And I wanted something that was geared towards my own students and my own units of study that could get them the listening practice that's similar to the experience that they might have on the access test, yet also give them a learning course that would allow them to explore the vocabulary that they're listening to answer questions and do some comprehension and some grammar type practice, and then also make some kind of larger link then past that to their lives or how they might use that. Because so much of the stuff that's online that you can get for free is, it's about grocery shopping or other everyday skills, which is great, but that's not appropriate necessarily for what I have to teach the majority of, which is, academic skills in the language of math, science, social studies, and language arts. So, social language is only a fifth of the language that I have to impart on my students or use. So I have in turn been working with making some videos with Beyond, and then putting them into Articulate, which is a course module that you can, make flip cards for vocabulary. You can have quizzes that you can track, and then I can make those. I can tailor them specifically to whatever story or reader's theater dialogue we might be using, so that they have an opportunity with reader's theater, they can read the dialogue with each other and practice, but then they can move on to also listen to another variation of it that I've made in this animated video, and then answer some questions and apply the language. So I've been one of those people that if I can't find what I need, I have to make it myself.
The true teacher way. I know, as a household of teachers, if it's not done just the way we want it, it's worth putting 10 hours into, just so it says my students' names. Yeah, exactly. I think what's incredibly evident is just that you're so much more than a teacher. You are an advocate, and you are so dedicated. And I love the progression of your career through a master of ELA, regardless of the grade level, but transitioning into an advocate for kids that really need the support the most, because whether they're successful at the end of high school or not is a huge, huge predictor of many things in their future lives. And then to kind of drill down and see that English language was this almost, I don't want to hopefully come off rude and say, but almost overseen or ignored section of that population, because it's a very difficult, it's almost one of those things that when you uncover it, it turns into its own monster. I guess the question that I would have is, for someone that has very little experience with obviously accommodating learners and providing support, it was what I did for the beginning of my career. But what is your tendency, you have a new kid come in, we'll say midway through a year, that you've already kind of gotten your routines and expectations and supports, and you've already, for everyone else, created comfort. How do you start interacting with a kid? How do you intake? Obviously, you have some, hopefully, data and information, but with the WIDA and those type scales. But I've got to imagine that time with that student to be seen as a trusted individual is a huge portion. And then to get up to speed and say, hey, we need you to be really productive when you get to math class a little bit later. So what does that interaction look like? And what are your primary focuses when working with a relatively new student, whether they're international or domestic and just English is just not their primary language?
Well, I think the first thing I do, is I have a really welcoming environment. The kids in my class are really welcoming to new kids also. So we spend a lot of time, just finding out about each other. And then I don't really, kind of push into the new student's space. I spend, a good few weeks letting them watch me interact with everybody else. And so as they see that I know about what you're doing in math, or I know about what you're doing in the hall, or I know that you're on the baseball team, or any number of things like that, and we interact and talk about those things and use them even as examples in some of our lessons, obviously positive things. I can then approach the student and say, hey, I was talking to your math teacher, or we use Infinite Campus, which is an online program where we can see their schedules and their grades and their attendance and things like that. And so I look and I get a report. I've asked the registrar, she sends me a report every week of my students' grades in all their classes. And so then each one day a week, we spend a little time talking one-on-one about that. So the new student will see me talking to all the other students before I get to them. And so they know that none of the other kids have been embarrassed. None of the other kids have been shamed. It's a positive, I support you, go get 'em, Tiger conversation. So I think it just evolves from there.
It almost turns into that itinerant support, right? It's really mostly to support along the way. Ken, I'll let you jump in with the next question. But the one thing that I wanted that as you're saying that is, it's kind of, Ken and I have talked a lot about, because we tend to bring the technology, I don't want to say the tools, but the enthusiasm about technology to our classrooms, and let the kids be the advocates to kind of urge the other teachers to get on board. If the other kids are creating these great projects, that's wonderful. But if they're advocating for how they'd like to have student choice or just good educational practices, it makes your world a lot easier when you already know they're going to stop you in the halls. And I think that's just a minor thing, but you almost let your kids advocate for new students to say, hey, this woman, she's pretty wonderful. You're in good hands. You'll follow the routines and you'll follow all the rules, but you don't necessarily need to do that much more. I just find that really interesting.
And I come from my school is really fantastic because I've been able to, throughout my career at the same school, identify an area that needs attention and say, hey, here's my plan for that, let me do it. And the final step in all of that was that through being in ESL, I noticed that a lot of these kids don't necessarily know how to get to the next step after high school. And so they just graduate and then, go in the family business or, find some other job that might be interesting to them. But they're not really pursuing what maybe they really would like to do. And so me and a Spanish teacher friend of mine created a program that we named Adelante, and we first started it for Latino kids in the school, but now we've opened it to basically anybody who's first generation. And so we take them in second semester of their junior year for one period a day, and then first semester of their senior year. And it's a class all about how to go to college, how to pick a college, how to pick a trade school, how to pay for it, how to stay, how to graduate, how to advocate for yourself, how to public speak, financial literacy. We take field trips. It's fantastic. And so it's been kind of a pipeline where I send my ELL students through, and then anybody else in the school who needs that same extra support or guidance is also welcome to be in it. And
That's incredible. I think so often it's overlooked how much of a difference teacher leaders can make. And you are that teacher leader. Like you said, identifying a need, creating a program. Obviously, you need the support of administrators, and we need administrators to pull a lot of strings or push a lot of agendas to accomplish that. But the schools really need teachers like you because you are in there day in and day out with the kids. You see those needs and you speak up for them. And that's just incredible. I wanted to tack something onto the question Matt was asking about welcoming those new students. How do you involve families? What does your communication style look like with families? How do you bring that connection to home? Because I'm sure that it is super important. It's important in every classroom, but even more so for you.
Yeah. So, phone calls. We have a program that we can use for three-way phone calls called Telelingua. I don't know if it's a national thing, but that's a nice way to, instead of trying to get a parent to come in or trying to send some poorly translated letter home, if you have a three-way phone call with an interpreter, that's a great tool. Ask kids to call their folks. I used to invite parents to come in, and we'd have like a parent night, and then it just seemed that more and more people were too busy, and so I was getting less and less people coming, and I was like, I'm tired. I don't want to come at night anymore. And this year it's been interesting because working from home remotely the majority of the year, my school phone is my cell phone. And so now, when I make phone calls to parents, all of a sudden now I also get texts from them and phone calls back. And I don't really mind that. If I think it's past the boundary, I don't answer, obviously. But I've never really minded that. I don't feel like, especially with my population, I help them in so many different ways. I mean, I've gone with students to ATMs to show them how to use the ATM. I've worked with families to figure out how to do the FAFSA. I go to their house. I've been to many students'
That's incredible.
houses.
I just want to offer one quick tip. It might be a little bit too late for you, but just so you know and others, Google does offer something called Google Voice, which you can tag to any Google email, even your personal. You can create a phone number and you can set it up that you can text and call from your web browser, but you can also add the app to your phone and you can text and call right from the app on the phone. And the user on the other end thinks they are just texting with a regular phone. There's no differentiation between. So it's a way to establish that connection, like you're talking about. That you might even going back to normal school next year. The way you were talking, you have found value in parents being able to text you might be an extra layer of security. So it might be something to consider. And it's also kind of nice because it's separate from your texts. It's like if I go to this app, this is just communication for school. So it's kind of a nice little free
Yeah,
feature that you can very easily set up. That's Google Voice.
That's
that's a great tip. Thank you.
yeah, a great tip. I guess I wanted to. You were mentioning that I feel like your position is so community driven too. So by mentioning, hey, you're going and helping fill out forms and kind of career planning and going to ATMs and I'm sure prepping for job fairs. I've got to imagine that's a portion of it. What is your work? I imagine you have some connections in the local community to say, hey, here are some options. Is that something that you spend a lot of time in, or you just develop the skills for the kids to then go and kind of conquer it on their own and in an independent style?
Yeah, the kids definitely do it on their own. I don't necessarily have a lot of community connections. I reach out to people, teachers within the school, in terms of if you can help in this situation or that. But mostly, well, that's not true because we have in the past there's a community outreach, college connection nonprofit that helps families and is bilingual, and they'll help families with the FAFSA and other financial aid things and the applications for different schools, and they're even more of an expert than I am. And so recently, in the last few years, I have deferred all of those kinds of questions to that group because it just feels like it's less responsibility for me. I'd hate to mess something up.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like when bringing up those points, just a few things are going through my brain. Does your school have something similar to this for, as you mentioned, you created this program because of the need for your Latino students at first, and then other groups. Is there something similar school wide, since it would be good for all kids, or is it just really at this point purpose based for those learners?
Well, we have fantastic guidance counselors, and they work with all of the students school-wide, and they go into the cores, and they talk about FAFSA and college applications and things like that. But, in a large group that's not necessarily geared individually and saying, hey, you have to fill out 4 applications for a grade in my class, that's a little, more intense for the kid, and there's a lot more follow-through than just this counselor that comes in one day. And then our school used to be very... everybody could be everything. We had 150 cheerleaders. There was no tryouts. We didn't start out as a school that had AP because we felt like every kid should be able to have a chance to be in any kind of class they wanted, and if we put labels on it, yada yada. But as time progressed, families want AP, families want honors. So they created a program at our school called SOAR. And SOAR is the honors program that kids have to apply to and get in. And there is an element of SOAR that is all about post-secondary goals and aspirations and follow through and getting there. And so, of course, I'm like, well, if we're going to have that for that kind of kid, we have to have it for the other kinds of kids also.
Absolutely. So, yeah, and I know in our school district we have a program that we're obviously it's a little different in COVID times, but our high school has a very flexible schedule that leans itself to an experience, kind of like a teacher preparation at this point, how every year of school you're in a different classroom with a little bit more expectations on you. But we've got kids taking college classes, we have kids in internships, and kids that I think the key is you would have your traditional, hey, and to use a generalization, I'm not great at academic school, so I'm going to go to a career tech. It is totally stigmatized it to say, hey, I'm a high academic learner, but I love the idea of going into beauty and cosmetics. And so the opportunity in high school to try that, regardless of the traditional path that they would go through. I just find it interesting that is seeming to be more of a positive trend for high schools, and really making learners prepared when they leave school, not to leave and graduate and say, now what? I think that's a massive problem that we are actually seeing a paradigm shift of finding a way to tackle that while we have them in a free environment. Ken and I were in a previous pod talking about, I can give them a free version of this education that's safeguarded with support. That's way more powerful than them trying to find it out and potentially wasting time and really losing opportunities that way.
Absolutely. And it's so important too that we don't focus so much on college as the end all be all. And it's important that we as a society see that there's worth in every kind of job, career, avocation, vocation, and that we have to allow kids to experience, like you said, all of the different options to see what they might want to do, might not want to do. You don't have to go to college to have a good living. So, and we spend a lot of time with that. It sounds like we're trying to send you to college, but we're just trying to send you to some kind of after high school training. Because all we've done is prepare you now for this after high school training. That's the most important thing.
Finding your passion, pursuing your passion, and if they want to work hands on, in some type of, let's just say a mechanic, well, get that job as a mechanic, or get that job, sweeping floors at the auto dealership while you take classes at night. What's your plan to harness your skill, to harness your passion? Like you said, pursuing something of a level of training, But, like you said, just knowing what to do after high school. Where do you go from here? I was actually having a conversation with, I'm working in secondary now after spending a long time in elementary. And what's kind of nice is all the kids that I had are in the high school. So I'm seeing a lot of students that I was working with previously. And I was in a shop class, and it was a metalworking class, and a student that I had, very bright student. And he was telling me that, this was his third metalworking class that he had taken. He's really into it, and he wants to pursue it as a career. And I said, that's great. I said, you could probably get a job in welding very, very quickly out of high school, and you can probably make really good money right out of high school. I said, but what I want you to remember is 20 years from now, that's not going to be really good money like it is when you're 18. So get that job right away if you're passionate about that, but go to school at night on business. Learn how to run a business so that you one day are the person running the business, not working in the business, or pursue something that you can take that talent and that skill to the next level. Because that's sometimes I feel students pursue that job that is great money when they're 18, but the money doesn't necessarily change for the next 20 years. So just having that plan, having that conversation, having someone like you to support that path and just challenge them so that they think about what they're doing.
Yeah. I have to share a success story. So my wife is a fourth grade teacher with me, and we went to graduation last year, and one of her former students graduated, and the next month opened her own business, which was wild. And they take planters and different succulents in different vases, and it's kind of like one of those painting parties that everyone goes and paints and builds something all together, but it's all succulent based. But to see a 19-year-old girl with a storefront in our town that's running her business, and she is the main worker. Now I know that she has support from family members and some community, but what we're hearing is that they are risk takers, and they're willing to take on these opportunities. And obviously through some great ag classes that she took, really felt passion. She probably was a traditional college bound student that fell in love, but also made her passion into a career. And it's one of those things that, if any time, I like to be optimistic that of any time in education, right now is one of those that when you really find your passion, it's not, hey, I have to go to 4 years and then 3 years of a master. There's definitely many careers and many paths, and that works for some many kids. But the fact that you could have a kid leave your program and be a storefront or a service that you could have at your own house or experience months after graduation is really, really neat. And that's what it's all about.
Definitely. So I would love to continue this conversation, but I would like to pivot into our next section of the show, a look at one of your lessons, Amy. So Matt and I are going to throw some questions back and forth at you, but feel free to take them down the path that you want. It's really just to share something that you do with our listeners. So I'm going to ask the first question. And is this lesson a single lesson, or is it more of like a project or a unit overview?
Probably I can speak to a lesson.
So we kind of have an idea of what you're going to answer for the next question, but when looking at the grade level or the subject area and time of the year, how would you narrow down this lesson? Is there a certain time that you do it with a certain group of students? What would you kind of express to either of those questions?
Well, my grade level is high school, but what I really, I don't just teach ninth graders. It's all different grades in one, so they're based on their language levels. And the lesson I'm thinking about right now is what I have to do with being a remote teacher and a hybrid teacher at the same time, and this online learning platform that they've given us called iLit, and how I have to use the same level in ILIT, so the same curriculum for my expanding, which is the highest level class, as well as my developing, which is the mid-level class. And so I have to really look at what kinds of supports do I add in for the developing that I didn't necessarily give to the expanding, and what kinds of extensions do I give to the expanding that I don't give because of the scaffolds that I give to the developing. It's always a juggling act.
For sure. So are there specific objectives for the lesson through this platform, or this platform is serving as the base for where you're delivering different types of lessons?
Well, the actual platform that we deliver lessons is Schoology, but then this ILIT learning, whatever it is, has the curriculum. So, it's got day 1, 2.24, and, of course I can't work like that, and I can't work with you telling me my script. So I kind of jump around between different lessons, and I'm looking for the thread. And today specifically, in talking about a lesson, I was looking at comparing and contrasting elements of what's happening in the story to real life, because we're reading a dystopian novel called The Last Book in the Universe, and it's really tech-oriented, and so they're going shopping at this store, and there's things that they can buy at their store that we can also buy at our store, and there's a passage that we're reading, and with my expanding kids, I didn't show them the passage. We read it, they heard it, they're listening to it. There's a great narrator who has all the different voices, way better than I could ever read to them. And I asked them about what are the similarities, what can they buy that we can buy, and what can they get that we can't get in terms of differences. But then when I went on to do it with developing, I displayed the passage, or the 2 paragraphs, so that they could actually look. And what was interesting to me today was that those kids in the developing class that could actually see the paragraph and identify the specific details were much more limited than the kids who I did not display or give the scaffold of the visual words, because they had remembered and expanded farther about things that we both could buy in each of the societies. In terms of objectives, yes, it has objectives, and whatever.
So this next one is probably one of my favorite questions, and I think we already have an idea, but if you were to specify what exactly are you expecting of students to do in this lesson that you're kind of profiling? What are they actively doing throughout the lesson?
So from the kids' end, what I'm able to do is broadcast different things to them. So I can show them different graphic organizers. When I'm, thinking out loud about what we're reading, I can broadcast, lists of things. We can go through. I can show a little video, and then at the end, there's usually a survey that I can send to them, and it asks them, okay, what do you know? So it's a lot like Pear Deck that way. But they've created the different slides, and then I can see their responses, and then we use the chat. We're in the Zoom, and so lots of times I'm just looking at blank spaces with names on it, and so I'll ask them, here, is this an example of a detail that supports our prediction? And it's like crickets. So okay, in the chat, yes or no, does that detail? And it has to be fast. So, I'll get yes, or no, yes, no, yes. And it's like, okay, if you said no, why did you say no? You don't want to talk, put it in the chat. And then if I'm sharing my screen, boom, everyone sees your chat.
That's great. You painted that perfect. My next question is about what is your role during the lesson, but you gave us a perfect picture of what you're doing and what the students are doing. A perfect picture of what it's like to be a teacher right now. So the last question is, what advice do you have for yourself the next time you would teach this lesson? Or it seems like it's something you're doing more on a repetitive basis. So what are some adjustments that you've made to improve it a little bit?
Well, it's interesting because the only reason my expanding didn't get the visual is because I forgot to push the broadcast button. But because then the next hour I was using it with the developing kids, and I did push the broadcast button, that told me that, hey, I don't necessarily know if I want to broadcast that section of that anymore, because that limited their responses. And had I left it open for them to, wander through their mind, they would have come up with much better ideas than they did by just looking in the text.
It's like the age-old battle of, do you put a rubric on your open-ended creative projects? Because you want criteria, you want expectations, but you always have that fear of, are you going to pigeonhole their projects to fit the mold that you've created through that rubric? So it's kind of it sounds like the same thing.
We were doing an electricity project. Our kids were building flashlights, and I made the mistake of showing one Pringle can one. And the next year, this was last year, I had 14 Pringle flashlights that all serve the same purpose. It's that age old, like, hey, I'm trying to do this to support, but it just narrows that complete perspective.
Did they at least use different flavors of Pringles?
It was all decorated. I don't know. They put duct tape and everything on it. So but it is, that's really the hard problem. And Ken and I talk about, like, Sir Ken Robinson and his ideas on creativity a ton, and just really, how do you manage, because it may be a basic activity that you just need to show that you retained information, but it's also a huge amount of creative thinking. And I'm sure that's where your end of working through language, the descriptive language, the academic language, has got to be just exhilarating for you to almost, and not to make you more upset, to miss out on that opportunity of such expansion is a missed opportunity. But at least you had it one class, whether it was a mishap or not.
Right. And the second version was, even though it seemed more limiting, it had its own aha moments, and the value was there.
So our last portion of the show is called the exit ticket, and these are 4 questions that we ask all of our guests. So question number 1 is, what is the best thing a teacher can do to make a student's school experience better?
Talk to them about their lives. Smile, accept them where they're at. When they're late, don't yell at them that they're late. Just say, hey, glad you made it. Have a seat. This is what we're doing. Because life's too short to be mad at kids all the time. So just talk to them. The more they know that you care, the more they'll learn from you.
Everyone needs to rewind that and listen to that again. That was great.
All right, so it's pretty clear that you obviously have gotten some great advice to get you where you're at right now, and thank you for sharing as much as you have. But is there any specific advice that you received along the way, whether it was from a colleague, a supervisor, or even a student, that you think about frequently, or when you wake up to go into a tough day, something that really inspires you to give your all, that just has completely changed your shift in how you view what you do every day?
I can very easily tell you what it is, and I remember when I heard it and when I learned it. And it was when I was transitioning from being a language arts English teacher into the ALPS program, and my new teaching partner said to me, Amy, we don't teach subjects, we teach kids. And yeah, who cares? In the long run, they're not going to remember your math equation or your, maybe your science experiment, but they're really just going to remember how you treated them and how you made them feel about themselves.
Very, yeah, 100% agree. So the school year goes in waves. There's stressful times, approaching report cards, conferences. When teachers are in those moments or those weeks where it's just like, it feels like you can't make it to Friday, what is something that you want to say right now to help them kind of power up and rise through that moment?
Every day is different. It's like Groundhog Day in a lot of ways, but the beauty of being a teacher is that every day, every year is different. You might be teaching the same things, but it's all different. And So just wait. Things change. And usually they don't get worse. Usually they get better. Right. Right. Well, and just be easy on yourself. We're our harshest critics, and we need to not do that so much because, we're doing a lot and we're giving everything we have, and it doesn't go unnoticed, even though it may go unacknowledged.
So last one, not to give you any more work, but if there is any way that people who are listening to this could get in contact with you, support you, maybe pick your brain further, what's the best way, besides your personal phone number, to text and call you, to get in contact with you, to kind of extend that conversation further?
Did you set up your Google Voice while we were recording so that you could give that out?
No, sadly, I did not do that. And I don't really have a Twitter handle or
Totally
anything
fine.
like that. So, I'm at amy.rehberg at adams12.org. At least for the next 4 months. I'm actually going to retire this year.
Oh, wow. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm excited. It's been a great career, but I started my career. I started after I didn't even know I wanted to be a teacher, and so I got an English degree and went to the Virgin Islands to make a lot of money and travel around the world, and that didn't necessarily pan out. I decided, maybe I should get a job, and there were some things that led to me deciding, yes, I should be a teacher. But I feel like I deferred that dream to travel around the world, and so COVID's trying to continue to make me defer my dream, but I'm not going to. So we're in the process of selling most of our possessions, and we're going to just take off and travel in the United States until the borders open, and then start to see the world. And I have a lot of students in the world that I get to go visit in Bangkok and Vietnam and things like that. So
That's incredible.
That's amazing.
yeah,
Congratulations.
Yes.
That's a life's work that kind of all amounts to what you deserve. So that's awesome.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you very much.
That's what a great way to end this recording. This has been great, Amy. I've personally learned a lot. I think you offered a lot of great insight, a lot of actionable tips for our listeners, and just a great reminder of what is important, what we do each day, and what we do for our students. So thank you for everybody for listening. Any of the resources that Amy mentioned, as well as her email for the next 4 months, will be listed on our show notes page, which can be found at powereduup.com/show6. Please share this podcast with someone that you think could benefit from listening to it or watching it, whether you're on a podcast app or on YouTube. If you haven't done so already, please become a member at powereduup.com. Start connecting, start sharing ideas, and asking questions. And as always, you can find us on any social media platform at Power EDU Up. So, Amy, thanks again. Your students are super, super blessed to be in your class and very lucky and fortunate. And although you may be retiring, I can say without a doubt, just based on this conversation, that your impact will continue at your school because you clearly have set up a program and multiple programs of success to continue that support for students. So thanks again. And Matt, why don't you take us on out of here?
And as we power down this episode, hopefully, I got to imagine we leave you feeling extra powered up. Have a great week. We'll talk to you next time.
Thanks a lot.